Alright, hi everyone. Today I'm going to be presenting to you a slightly different video format from the on-the-fly types that I've been doing for the past, well, since the beginning of the channel. It's going to be a bit more structured and more thought out this time, because I feel like the information that I want to portray here needs to be presented in a way where it unfolds so that the deeper layers can be understood via an understanding of the layers on the outside, to build a body of knowledge in that way. So today I'm going to be talking about natural law, and this isn't something that I've thought up. It's you could almost think of it like hidden laws that are not immediately obvious, but through deductive logic you can take what we see in the world today, which seems to be chaos and too many opinions which are not based in reality, yet are espoused as something that is true, to explain why it is that human society seems to be such a mess right now, and what the actual solution is based on science, based on something that's repeatable and observable, that you can see in the external world, but then to figure out what the root causes of those results in the world, which we see as chaos now, is within the mind. And it's a holistic science. It combines a multitude of the physical sciences and psychology. See, the sciences nowadays are more concerned with the god of our culture, which is materiality, and the constant consumption on a finite planet of its finite resources, where endless growth is seen as equivalent to life. Therefore, the sciences are narrowed. They're only concerned with the infinite expansion of material. Funding to scientific endeavors only serve to further the culture's agenda. There's no one taking a look in each department and synthesizing philosophy and science in a holistic form which accounts for everything. So this is what natural law is attempting to do, to put that intent into language, to show how the higher spiritual laws affect what we see manifest, what are the root causes of the problems that we see today, and why a misunderstanding of these laws, or a complete lack of knowledge of them, has caused chaos and carnage for the human species. So this is what I'm going to attempt to outline. Natural law encompasses a body of knowledge that can be said to be occulted, which means hidden knowledge. And it's been hidden for a reason, because having knowledge of natural law would empower the masses to take back sovereignty of their own lives and to adjust our culture in a way that's in alignment with nature. That's why it's called natural law. It's not man's law, it's nature's law. So the controllers of this world don't want us to know about this. They keep the knowledge for themselves, and they have used the knowledge against people and kept them in an ignorant state through the schooling systems, and then through work, through the indoctrination of the TV, the mass media, social media, the internet. If the public was to know about it, they would lose the power that they have. Their power differential relies on people not understanding their true sovereignty through this knowledge, and then externalizing their power to an external source. It relies on belittling people, making them believe that they're powerless, and gets them to believe that a ruler is required for human society to operate. You know, it's a body of science which is not known to the general population. It consists of hidden knowledge about the workings of the human psyche and the laws of nature, both the physical and unseen spiritual laws which govern the physical laws. So, part of it is scientific and the other part of it is philosophical, because material probes cannot reach the unseen spiritual laws. So it's a great synthesis of the realms here and above. It's going into the cause, yet we can see the effects manifest as behaviour in the real world based on those spiritual laws. It encompasses all of modern science that we see today, and that which they refuse to acknowledge with their scientism and material fetishism, their fixation on what can only be seen with the physical eye and extension of it through measuring devices into the frequencies which are not accessible to that sense and other senses of the human body. The measuring devices of science just expand the five senses, and there's a complete negation of the existence of any other form of sense outside of human perception. And yet they can't explain what consciousness is, yet a true scientist should remain open that one day material probes should be able to explore the unseen realms. Yet I find that within the institutions, having been involved in the scientific institutions, there's a stiff upper lip in regards to a rampant ego, thinking that essentially there are no spiritual laws, and therefore all funding of scientific endeavor has just gone into the worship of the god of materialism. And it's why the worship of science, just because it brings technology and material, is not the be-all and end-all. It's not the answer entirely. Wisdom needs to be applied. We've been able to create solar panels, but also split the atom for destructive purposes, to create nuclear bombs. The internet has allowed us to communicate, to discuss deep topics such as this, but it's also been used as a propaganda tool on the masses to distract them and to numb the pain of mundane reality with trivialities. You know, just an understanding of the material world does not imply morality, does not imply what we should do, what actions we should take as human beings with this destructive understanding, or this understanding of the material world that's capable of being destructive, or that's capable of being aligned with the rules of nature in order to produce order, harmony, and civilization. So this is trying to bridge the other half of the equation, to bring together the complete knowledge that synthesizes both the intellect and the intuition. You know, Just because you're intellectual doesn't mean you're intelligent. Intelligent, you've got intelli for intellect and genare regarding intuition and insight. Just because you're intellectual doesn't mean you're intelligent. Science, as I see it today, is mainly concerned with dissection and compartmentalization of various disciplines, and we see this throughout the whole society. Since the Industrial Revolution, there's been hyper specialization. You learn a discipline and then you become fractured in your mind. You only know your one thing, and then everything else is a given. Therefore, everything else can be put on autopilot. You can see the same thing in regards to psychology. Different elements of the human mind are considered in isolation to each other, just as depression, anxiety, cluster B personality types, epigenetics, they're all considered, various pathologies, they're all considered to be isolated and separate. That can be fixed with a drug administered by psychiatrists who reduces everything down to a chemical imbalance outside of the external influences of environment and society. It's all connected together, but it requires holistic intelligence to put the disparate pieces together. Most of the scientific institutions are atheistic and completely negate the spiritual aspect of the human experience. So, following on from that, I want to preface that this video is a breakdown of Mark Passio's 8-hour seminar on natural law, which he gave at his Free Your Mind conference. So I'll leave a link in the description below if you guys want to delve a little bit deeper. But I felt the need to condense that seminar down to its key points, to distill it in a way so that it's more digestible to people who don't have the time to spend 8 hours looking at that kind of presentation. I'm also going to be throwing in some of my observations and adding a little bit to the points that he made and paraphrase my own interpretation in an attempt to de-occult this knowledge, because this knowledge needs to be known, otherwise chaos is going to continue to ensue. And in the times that we see now, I see it fitting to share this with anyone who listen. So I appreciate your time, and I'll crack on. Okay, so I want to start off by explaining the problem, and from a more spiritual perspective, it seems to be that we're having this observable experience through the lens of 5 senses, which appear manifest as some avatar able to sense its environment, but those senses appear to be limited and dense, one within the perceivable range of that sense. So for instance, you can only see a fraction of the visible light spectrum or hear certain frequencies of sounds that other animals or plants might be able to perceive. And 2, because we're limited to 5 senses. So in essence, we are this being that has some kind of informational field that's able to perceive the density of vibrations, i.e. the physical worlds that it's tuned to lock into. And observe. But even within that, there's such vast differences in personality and ways of perceiving the world that it appears that we are entirely the subject of our own experience, and we can never quite grasp the actual objective reality through our biases and the programming that has been applied to our perception to get us to see reality in a skewed way. I think one of the most real examples of this might be someone who's colorblind. They don't see the full range of colors that the human eye is supposed to perceive. And how do we know that, say, my perception of red is your perception of red? How do we know that? How is it that animals can perceive other ranges of the five senses that we can't? Some animals even have extra senses, like how some fish can detect electromagnetism for the purpose of navigation. Yet our minds will trick us into believing that what we are seeing is objective reality and that our subjective experience is the truth, when the truth is something that's intangible to direct human experience. But we can get close to the truth and we can align ourselves, and when we align ourselves closer to the truth, we can orient our actions and reality that corresponds with how the universe works. So this is a graph relating to truth versus perception, and I never really understood the idea of frequency in the context of how spiritualists will talk about raising your frequency. What does that actually mean? Because it has a different definition in physics, which is just the modeling of wave forms of energy. But it's more related to how the universe is vibratory, and to states of minds that are often associated with joy, bliss, ecstasy, but also states of mind that could be considered more conscious. So intuitively, I feel like this places a density of vibration where our consciousness has been caught up in a limited set of rules, which denies our full capacity for creative expression because we're limited by the physical laws of this universe. So we've got three lines here, and the oscillations, the sinusoidal waves that you see, is human perception, and the white lines for each graph is objective reality as it is, the truth. And you can see that if you're operating at a high frequency, you cross the line of truth at a greater degree than someone who is, say, the red line at a much lower frequency. However, by virtue of being human, we all deviate from that line of truth by the same degree, because we're motivated by passions, desires, subjective experiences. And the truth is what is going on right now and what has happened in the past, and the future is dictated upon our alignment with the truth as it stands objectively, not what you think, not what you feel, but what's actually going on. The universe doesn't care about humans in the sense of conforming to what they think law is. Humans believe that they can create the law. Humans essentially have become egoic in that way, at least in modern civilization. It could be argued that other cultures in the past were more in tune with natural law. The universe does not care about human perception. The universe reacts to particular laws, just like how the laws of physics abide, and the laws of physics are part of natural law. It's more of the effect of mentalism, because everything originates in the mind before it's manifest in physical reality. But I'll get into that a bit later on. Where our culture has become so egoic, the human ego can't seem to reconcile objective reality. This mind virus is a rampant ego, self-perpetuating, and it cuts a human off from its higher nature, i.e. it wants to get you to be a slave to the desires and the survival instincts of the body. The society now is an expression of that mind virus, pure ego, just a fixation on the material as it appears, and now that has become the source of life, the materiality of it all. That's why a common trait with NPCs is that once they have become secure within their life, they don't look for what's next, but they perpetually expand upon their material wealth and increase their comfort levels to the point where it becomes, you cross the line of diminishing returns and they don't really get that much more from it, but that's the only thing that they have. So society is purely focused on the ego. It's a mass shadow projection, and it thinks it's God and that it can dictate the laws of reality. And that relates to solipsism. The ego loves relativism and hates absolutism. Solipsism is a philosophy that only you and you alone is the sole arbiter of your experience, and that everything around you is just an emanation of your own mind, and that happens on an individual level, which I'll explain later on, and it has happened on a societal level, in that humans believe that they are the top of the food chain just because it appears that way within physical reality. But in negating the laws that construct the physical reality, they have now fallen prey in their ignorance. So if natural law is a set of objective principles that are binding, i.e. you cannot escape natural law within the physical universe as far as I'm concerned. Anywhere you are, these laws of physics and metaphysical unseen laws which governs the physical world cannot be escaped from. So that's one thing. And secondly, natural law is immutable, i.e. you are an effect of the spark of God, and there's no way for you to usurp the law through your law, because the expression of yourself is but the effect of the cause, which is the law of God. And when I say God, maybe I shouldn't use God in this context, but I say God as the source or the all, where all law emanates from. What's a good working definition of consciousness? And because you can have awareness, you can say that plants and animals are aware, and they are conscious to a degree, and consciousness doesn't necessarily have to be confined to one avatar or a single body. As I've explained in my video about thought forms and hive minds, that it might be possible that the animating force might not necessarily be soul in the sense of an individual observer looking through one avatar, but it might also be a group of bodies. For instance, insect hives are a good example of that, and the most interesting kind of hive is the human hive that we can see. It's like this aspect of your mind that gets taken over, that gives into group consensus over your own individual discernment, mostly to detriment, I would argue. And throughout history, you've seen mass psychosis taking place via this hive entity. For instance, the Salem witch trials, or communism and fascism in the 20th century, leading to mass genocide. And this is just an outcrop of a survival instinct within the human mind for gregariousness. And it seems to me the limit of human social memory within groups, the capacity to relate with other people, will go up to the limit of 150. It's called the Dunbar number. So this is the maximum amount of people that you can relate to. But in these massive civilizations consisting of millions of people cross-continentally, the effect of the masses becomes obscured to the people who only use their 5 senses to assess their situation. And it appears that only those who look at the masses or the hive through spiritual eyes are able to see within themselves the mechanism that gets used by the hive and taken for, or produces a mindset of taking what you see in front of you as gospel, because there's no capacity to assess with your senses the social dynamic beyond that which your brain limits you to. So the problems in the world have been obfuscated by the controllers onto the public by creating this sense of understandable chaos that only experts or people of authority, or that God's icon, that symbol of a savior that's going to provide you with reality. Reality is too complicated for you to comprehend for yourself, so something outside of yourself needs to now tell you what is. You could say that consciousness then would be the ability to recognize patterns out of the chaos and to not just be aware of your surroundings and react to them via the body's innate survival intelligence that seems to be an entity in and of itself. I can't remember whether it was the sympathetic or parasympathetic. No, sorry, it was the autonomous nervous system. That's what it is. That's another computerized aspect of yourself that it just runs on autopilot. But the consciousness in that would be the ability for the observer to recognize the patterns and the meaning with respect to the events taking place within the external world, but also within yourself. So we say that we talk about consciousness and we talk about becoming more conscious, or raising the collective consciousness, or raising your individual consciousness. It's just the ability to see the patterns within the awareness and not just have the awareness and have reactions to it. But once you recognize the patterns, you can make decisions upon that. So what might be the expressions of consciousness? Well, we have within the mental space our thoughts and emotions, and when these 3 parts of us work together in unity, they create a balanced psyche. It's all about making sure that your thoughts do not contradict your emotions, and then your resulting actions do not contradict either your thoughts or your emotions. So it's, as the old saying goes, as you think, so you feel, so you act. Cognitive dissonance is the result of a disharmony between those three aspects of consciousness, and we can see in the world today that most people have this harmony, because in regards to what's going on in recent times and the story that we've been told about the greatness of our current civilization and the values that we supposedly possess, and now I say we, but I actually mean them, it's pure cognitive dissonance. So there's disharmony within the expression of the consciousness of most of the people on this planet. And to go aside from solipsism, if the world was solipsistic, I wouldn't manifest this kind of reality. And I do believe in the other souls, other aware beings being here. However, we are subject to the body and its needs and the reactions of the physical world. Therefore, we are all participating within the same medium. Therefore, we all add our creative energy to it. So, as opposed to this place just being an expression of yourself in a solipsistic sense, I would argue that this is a shared, co-created reality. So, even if you yourself personally have got your thoughts, emotions, and actions all within alignment, that doesn't necessarily mean that society as a whole will be reflective of that. And the external is but an expression of the internal, which I'll get into a bit later on. Therefore, collectively, what you see is collectively what's going on within humans in general. Not necessarily for you or I, but it's what they're doing. And a lot of this harmony between the thoughts, emotions, and actions can be seen as a mental schism of worldviews. The distinction between being overly intellectual or overly based in intuitions. So if you look at the triune brain, you have the brainstem, which encompasses basic survival, fight or flight, the instinctual part of the brain. Then you've got the mammalian brain, which governs emotional processing, memories, is part of the limbic system, and it also encompasses the default mode network, the network that your brain utilizes when you're not particularly doing anything or thinking about anything. Then you have the neocortex, because this is the most recent development in the human brain, and it's what separates humans from animals, because it provides the ego and it provides that feedback mechanism for self-reflection, such that spiritual awareness and consciousness arises. It encompasses language, abstract thoughts, imagination, intuition. And I mostly want to talk about the left and right hemispheres of the neocortex and how imbalances in one side or the other will affect the lower two systems of the brain, the mammalian and brainstem. I'm not a neuroscientist, but this is a brief overview of how the hemispheres generate consciousness. So the left side of the brain is responsible for the right side of your body's motor control. It's associated with number skills, math, science, language, sequential linear thinking, objectivity, analytics, logic and reasoning. The right side of the brain is mostly associated with imagination, the ability to visualize 3D objects in the mind's eye, intuition, creativity, holistic thinking, divergent thinking, subjective aspects of the self. It's a way of synthesizing uncorrelated subjects. It's responsible for emotion, compassion, and it controls the left side of your body in terms of motor controls. Now, I'm not saying that the hemispheres of the brain are mutually exclusive to those traits of consciousness, because the whole brain is responsible for a particular aspect of your mind. It's just that most of the required components to generate a particular aspect of the human mind will be localized in either the left or right side of the brain. To do logic, parts of the right side of the brain are needed, and for creative thinking, parts of the left brain is needed. They work in conjunction with each other. And what I want to talk about is what happens if you create, because you can, via neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, plasticity being how you arrange the physical neuronal structure within your brain to connect together different functional parts of the brain to create new patterns of thinking or feeling. Neurogenesis being the creation of neurons, but via that process we can become overly specialized in one side of the brain or the other. And what you find for folks who are more aligned with the masculine aspect of our consciousness, or the intellect, the left side of the brain, is it can lead to things such as rigid skepticism, whereby your one linear way of thinking is the only way that reality can be, and you must abide to the procedure. Therefore, the skepticism is not in the way of opening discourse, but more to shut down new ideas. It can, that plays and trickles down into scientism and atheism, through which you have now created a religion around scientific doctrine. A good example of that would be the theory, and I emphasize theory in quotation marks, because it is still a theory. Now, evidence would point that it is the most likely case, but theory nonetheless, the theory of evolution or the theory of the Big Bang. I personally think that those are most likely, but the point being is that when you subscribe to those theories with religious fervor, you now enter the dimension of religion, which is to bind. The definition of religion comes from religare, which is to bind, to thwart, to hold back from further progress. So it's putting your mind into a cage. That also plays into rigid skepticism, and from you deny yourself access to the spiritual dynamics, which goes outside of science into the realm of philosophy, because you can't put material probes into these higher dimensional spaces. So you could think of reality as being a series of layers, and there's layers above and below you. But what the people who subscribe to scientism and atheism do is they've perpetually expanded across the one layer that they're bound in, which is the material plane, and they're just broken down the material world to finer and finer grain sizes, trying to figure out the secrets of reality, when what they're really doing is just refining the effects of spiritual laws which has caused the physical world to become manifest. Through that you get expressions of solipsism, which is to say, the atheists will think that this place is just a clockwork mechanism, that there's no animating force to human consciousness. Everything's meaningless, everything just comes from a big bang, and then when you die you just go into the void, and that there will be nothing. But weirdly enough, they can't explain what consciousness actually is, and they don't seem to be aware that they are an observer
having experience, they can't explain that. And if you can't explain that, and you can't explain how what human consciousness is, I would not have the arrogance with your religious further to push an ideology on like that. So, because they have taken the meaning out of the universe, now anything's up for grabs, and man has become God, and now man creates law because there is no God who defines morality. Man can do that. It's the survival of the fittest dog eat dog, and that's what the solipsistic expression of that is. Now, there's no limiting factor to what morality is. Everything's relative. Moral relativism, yeah, that just goes into solipsism. And with macroevolutionary Darwinianism, you get social Darwinianism. Authoritarianism is another aspect of the masculine aspect of human consciousness. Everything has to be in accordance with the structure, this linear thinking, and there's the rigid skepticism. Everything must be done one way. To sum up, the intellect, the left side of the brain, that can be seen as the worldview of randomness. There's no order to the universe. Everything's just a big grand accident. There's no inherent meaning to it. Now, moving on to the feminine aspects of human consciousness, intuition, the right side of the brain, we can see that people who are imbalanced in that part of human consciousness experience naivete, because they think that everything is predetermined, and that there's this blind belief that God orchestrates everything and there is no free will, and that everything's just down to fate, and that you just gotta get on your knees. It's this unworthiness, this self-loathing, this capacity to be a willing slave to the laws of God.
And when I use God in this context, I'm not talking about how I have been using God to refer to natural law, i.e. God being the source, the supreme all, that which all law emanates from and through which all lower dimensions are bound by. I'm talking about religious gods, and more specifically the Abrahamic religions, the monotheistic religions. So just to preface that,
this tyrannical God that you have no power over, it's a slave complex in a way, and it leads to religious extremism through the naivete. And also we see solipsism being expressed just like you see in left brain imbalance, except for right brain imbalance it expresses itself in the sense of religion is, or God, the God of my religion, is the only arbiter of reality, and the dogma that comes from my religion is the way that things are. Therefore, we are all bound to my particular religion. So, all occurrences are preordained, and free will is an illusion, change is impossible, and action is inherently meaningless because God controls everything.
So how does the neocortex affect
the two lower layers of the brain? Well, you could say that because the left brain imbalances the masculine aspect of human consciousness, it can overdevelop the reptilian brain, the brain stem, which is more associated with fight or flight and survival and dominance. It's a master mentality, whereas right brain imbalance develops the limbic system, the emotional center, or overly develops it,
which can lead to an oversensitivity of emotion, whereby you can be suggested something and then be taken up by the emotional response that gets generated from that. For instance, somebody might gaslight you. We see that a lot in the religious institutions, telling people that they're spiritually inferior, such that they need the institution, they need to be a slave and be a subject to the dogma of that particular religion. Usually, if you have a balanced mind, both the left and right hemispheres, you can emotionally regulate yourself because you have the capacity for logic and critical thought. Yet you're not overly specialized in your thoughts either, because you have your emotions, which provide a barrier with your empathy for the authoritarian rule of the left brain.
See, both left or right brain imbalances will develop their respective lower part of the brain in an imbalanced way, such that it negates development of the other aspects to balance out the consciousness. So when we have a society where people are balanced either to the left or the right brain, we see that people who are imbalanced to the left brain become authoritarians or masters, because in their rigid skepticism and rampant ego and linear thinking, they think that they can dictate what law is with their moral relativism. And then people who are right brain imbalanced believe that the law is set and there's nothing that they can do about it and they're powerless. So it creates a slave mentality. So in the elite creating these brain imbalances via the various factors which indoctrinate us, schooling, television,
this creates a society that's based upon rulership, slavery, violence. And when you're imbalanced like that in the aggregate, you can never find any peace. You can't find order. There can only be chaos, because slavery with masters and slaves is the state of chaos.
When you have unity in your consciousness, your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions, then you're able to create a world that's in accordance with a balanced unity within your mind. So, what is the truth in this? Because we see that with the left brain imbalance, there's this randomness worldview,
meaning that all law is up for grabs and you can proclaim to be God.
And then in right brain imbalance, everything's deterministic. But what's the truth in all that? Is there free will? Or are we just bound to a clockwork mechanism? Well, the natural law aspect of that is the deterministic component. It is what we are bound to and that we find is immutable. So this is the deterministic aspect of reality, and the random aspect is simply our free will. But we can only apply free will within the confines of deterministic components, i.e. natural law, that exists within nature. If we do not abide by the laws of nature, we can't get what we want. The natural law will work in order to create the physical conditions that do not allow us to do what we want. We can't just choose to grow wings and fly if we want to. We can't just choose to have tons and tons of food just grow out of the ground just with the snap of our fingers. We can't solve the multitude of problems we see in the world today just by wanting it to happen. There are laws. There's a natural law that we are bound to. But if we understand the natural law through knowledge, then we can apply free will within the confines of natural law. There is free will. Everything's not completely deterministic, but balance between thoughts, emotions, and actions is key in understanding natural law. Is it nature versus nurture? Well, you look at epigenetics and how gene expression is affected by the environment. We can see that the genes might give you the predisposition towards particular diseases or temperaments, personality, but depending upon the environment that you're in will dictate which of those genes gets expressed. So you might have a predisposition, but that's not necessarily equal to a predetermination. That plays into, that's just the physical expression, genes, of the mental aspect. So we can see correspondence between the physical and the mental. We have the thoughts and the emotions of, our minds, the left and the right brain, epigenetics. All of this is this dualistic aspect of ourselves that needs to be balanced, and part of that is what's referred to as the shadow work, where you address the parts of yourself that you've rejected from your personality because of the inherent biases that are built within personality. If you think one way, then you're precluded from its opposite. Doing the shadow work and becoming aware of your blind spots works to make you more conscious. Once again, thoughts, emotions, and actions. The soul is simply an internalized consciousness programming the human brain, i.e., it's all done from within. And this hive mind, the culture, is the external programmer. There's the same principle of programmability that we see within humans. Human nature is that they're programmable. Epigenetics and the soul, and this entity keeps itself alive by devouring your mental real estate. It wants to embed itself within your mind, take up your mental real estate. That's the perversion of this place, in my opinion. Yeah, so in terms of consciousness, pattern recognition, in order to manifest the reality that we want in accordance with natural law, we can see that the thoughts and the emotions and actions needs to be aligned in accordance with this natural law. And in order to do that, we need to have the right programming. How can that work? Well, we can look at how you program computers, and I'm not saying that humans are computers, but humans, just like any other informational entity, abides by the same rules for programming, i.e., there needs to be an input of information, there needs to be a processing of that information, and there needs to be an output of that information. And the ancient technique of learning through antiquity can be denoted respectively as grammar, logic, and rhetoric, which is the same as input, process, and output used in modern terms today. Grammar being that first you need to take in all of the available information. It must be gathered, processed, understood. So once you have that information, then there needs to be a decision-making process, which is equivalent to the logic aspect of trivium, whereby you sift through the information that you've acquired and then you figure out what's relevant and what's not relevant, what's in alignment with the objective laws which govern our reality and what isn't. Then you can move on to rhetoric, which is your behaviour that you have enacted out from this decision making process, this logical stage. The rhetoric is what you enact in the world And the quality of your behaviour is based upon the quality of decision making. Through that, you get your manifested reality. So, just in the same way that if you put in a bad program into a computer, you will get garbage results. If you put shit into a person's mind, they will have a shit decision making process or shit manifested behavior. But it all starts from this set of steps. First, the information has to be available, and there's a difference between nescience and ignorance. If you're in a state of nescience, it means that the available information is not there in order for you to gather what is required to understand your environment, to make correct decisions, and then enact the appropriate behaviors based on the quality of the information, the quality of the decision-making process. And most people these days are ignorant, and ignorance is different from nescience, because ignorance implies that the information is readily available to you, but you choose to ignore the information. You choose to cast it aside for some other reason. But all of this points to the available information. Most people choose not to take in the information that's required for them to make the correct decision-making processes. I remember how confused I was with regards to politics when I was a kid growing up wanting to take part in the system. I thought to myself, I want to understand what politics is all about, how it actually works, how it relates to banking, how it relates to the military-industrial complex, or the schooling system, or the medical industry. How does this all connect? How do economics work? What is left and right paradigm? How does it work? But obviously, looking back on it now, they wanted to make the grammar stage, the informational aspect of it, nescient to us. And we're not in. There is not. The information's hard to come by in order to figure out how it all works, but it's not completely hidden from us either. So most people are ignorant in regards to curating the quality of the information that they take in, so that they can have the correct decision-making process, which is what I was looking for in politics. If I want to be a member of this so-called society, it's a pretty pathetic excuse for an society, if you ask me. It's more like a slavery grid. But I need to make correct decisions. I need to know. I need knowledge. I need information, quality information. And my enacted actions would contribute in the best way towards the construction of the best manifested reality. I just couldn't understand why people were so sure in what they know, even though what they know was just given to them. They were ignorant to the information around them. So, it depends. There are two spiritual currencies, which is time and attention. You will pay attention to what's around you. Take in the available information. Through your attention, are you going to spend your attention watching Netflix, watching the TV, Tail Live Vision, the idiot box? Or are you going to try to figure out how this reality works? Time is the next currency that goes hand in hand with attention. You pay attention and you spend time. Money is fiat, so it's not even real. The true value is in your time and attention. Acquire the correct information so that your actions can be correct. So when it comes to morality, most people have this idea that, there's this brainwashing that's taken place within our society, saying that morality is something that is just entirely a man-made concept, and it's down to the individual's preferences, it's down to their culture, where you come from, what your nationality is. It's something that man makes up. It's saying that man is God, and man can create the laws of the universe, because morality begets behaviour, which begets actions. So the morality is where the fault comes in, the cause, before the resultant action takes place within the physical universe. The physical universe is defined by physical laws. Therefore, how can I just decide what I prefer? Will the universe respond accordingly to that? Am I solipsistic in that sense? Do I think that everything revolves around me? Everything's a construction of my own mind, and that, I can choose for myself based on my preferences, based on how I feel about what's right and wrong, and the universe will just magically correspond to that. Well, good luck with that. You could run off the edge of a cliff and say that my fault is that I will fly. This is what I want. These are the laws that I want to create. Will it happen? No, it won't. You can put your hand in the fire and say that you just want your hands to be warmed up. Will you get a nice warming on a cold winter's evening? Or will the flesh be singed off until bone remains the longer you keep it there? I'd say the latter. Can we choose what the results of our actions are in the physical universe? Absolutely not. And this is the thing with moral relativism. How is it possible that you can ingest a certain substance in one country and then in another country, with the same physical materials, stardust essentially, from the cosmos, that's just been separated by arbitrary lines? How can in one place it be moral to do a particular action and in another place it not be moral? How does that make sense? Are there objective consequences to human behaviour? Absolutely. Absolutely. So, it's not a matter of the left versus the right within that political polarity. It's morals have got absolutely nothing to do with that. So let's look at the difference between natural law and man's law. So natural law is based upon principles and truth. So what's actually going on? What are the root causes? What are the principles that has caused this result within the physical world to take place? And within man's laws, you have just dogmatic beliefs. I have a belief that, or my preference within my individual or the society's collective solipsism. We are the gods. We define what should happen. This is the foundations upon within the mind where either order or chaos can take place. And we want to maintain order, and we don't want chaos, because natural law dictates that order is required for life to persist. If chaos was necessary, then man's law would be fine. And the consensus of life on this planet, i.e. not just an individual, but the consensus, or all of life, all individuals, all organisms, is to move forward and carry on living and thriving and combating the entropic forces of the universe to bring everything that is not in equilibrium into a state of equilibrium, into a balanced energetic state through which it seems to be that our consciousness can only be maintained within biological organisms that require chemical, how to explain it, chemical potentials, which derive movement of cellular activity and metabolism through the building up of potential through chemicals such as ATP derived through glucose through the process of the mitochondria in the cells, the discharging of energy in the form of movement. Well, that discharging is the descent into the entropy through which the universe itself is trying to bring you towards, but life can't exist in that state. Whoever set up this place has made that a rule. Therefore, the impetus of life's capacity to exist is towards order and against entropy. Rules, natural law, is the requirements to meet those demands for order. If life consensus was to tend towards entropy and chaos, then man's law would be perfectly suited for that. However, I would argue that life wouldn't exist for too long if that was the case. But no, the consensus is to maintain order over chaos, therefore rules need to be adhered to. Natural law is set in stone, it's immutable. Man in his arrogance and his ego can't override natural law. It's impossible. You do that, it would be like the analogy I made before of jumping off the cliff expecting to fly. So it must, natural law must be harmonized with, due to knowledge of what natural law is and a deep understanding of that. You need to take in the information so that you can create the right decisions, and then your behavior is a reflection of that. Natural law is universal. It exists. It applies anywhere in the universe, regardless of your location. We live in a physical universe. The physical laws takes precedence upon your moral relativity. With man's law, man's law is not universal. It's based upon different locations at the whim of legislators. Man's law changes with time. And before I discuss, natural law is eternal. We are bound to it. It's immutable. We have to abide to it, and then we can have free will within it. Then we can choose to have leeway. We can't just go off and try to break natural law because it doesn't meet our preferences. We are bound to it. And if we want life to persist in order to prevail over chaos, then knowledge of natural law is required. So along with moral relativism, people think that a right is just something that you can choose to create. But what actually is a right? And, this doesn't apply to animals, as they can't comprehend morality, nor do they understand the laws of entropy, in the sense of they can't cognize some degree of self-reflection of the actions that they've taken that would prevent the entropic state of death and decay. Their only means that they have to avoid that is built within their physiology, their body. They are largely stimuli response animals. There are arguments and especially in the higher mammalian kingdom, that there are fragments of individuality or the soul within animals. But on the large parts, natural law doesn't apply to these animals because they are the effect, i.e. they work harmoniously within an ecosystem, and there's no need for judgment on their part because they're incapable of it. On the large part, obviously there are caveats to that. Chaos is a teacher in terms of what causes harm, and we learn about what a right is through apotheosis, i.e. through the negative, or
Deductive logic. You can take what we see in the world today, which seems to be chaos and too many opinions which are not based in reality, yet are espoused as something that is true, to explain why it is that human society seems to be such a mess right now, and what the actual solution is based on science, based on something that's repeatable and observable, that you can see in the external world, but then to figure out what the root causes of those results in the world, which we see as chaos, is within the mind. And it's a holistic science. It combines a multitude of the physical sciences and psychology. See, the sciences nowadays are more concerned with the god of our culture, which is materiality, and the constant consumption on a finite planet of its finite resources, where endless growth is seen as equivalent to life. Therefore, the sciences are narrowed. They're only concerned with the infinite expansion of material. Funding to scientific endeavors only serve to further the culture's agenda. There's no one taking a look in each department and synthesizing philosophy and science in a holistic form which accounts for everything. So this is what natural law is attempting to do, to put that intent into language, to show how the higher spiritual laws affect what we see manifest, what are the root causes of the problems that we see today, and why a misunderstanding of these laws, or a complete lack of knowledge of them, has caused chaos and carnage for the human species.
Yeah, so what is a wrong? Well, it can just be stated as anything that encroaches upon a right. What is right is based in truth, it's moral, it's in harmony with natural law. The actions based in it do not result in harm to sentient beings. A wrong is not based in truth. It goes in opposition to natural law. The actions result in harm. It's as simple as that. And we can know what a right is through apotheosis and what is a wrong. There's all sorts of caveats to this. How do you define what is harm? And there's situations where harms must be done to prevent a greater harm. It's all about minimizing chaos and entropy via principles, i.e. what comes first. So an example of this would be, we need to steal taxes from people for the sake of social security. So you're stealing from people to help people. Well, at its foundation, you've caused theft. And upon further complications of this idea that I've figured out, you can see how the wrong can be obfuscated as a right. Apotheosis means to say no. It's a method of logical reasoning employed when given a limited set of possibilities, in order to arrive at the knowledge by way of exclusion of known negatives, describing what something is not, affirmation through negation. So deciding through the apophatic could be part of the logic or decision making process of trivium. It can be delineated from cataphatic inquiry, which is reasoning in the affirmative. You're not weeding down via a process of elimination through cataphatic inquiry. It's an inductive sense of reasoning, whereas the apophatic reasoning is deductive, because you're narrowing down to the essence. You're saying what something is not a right. You're not looking at what is rights, you're looking at what are wrongs. In a sense, right and wrong is common sense. It's as simple as that. It's not complicated, it's not convoluted. And that's one of the things that they've done to the masses. One of the techniques of propaganda is to create confusion, or to make something that's simple in essence seem more complicated than it actually is. Therefore, it deters people from trying to find the truth, because they think that the truth is greater than themselves, and it creates, it adds fuel to the fire of this Stockholm syndrome, and this helplessness that the world is too complicated. Therefore, the proxy of an institution needs to mediate a narrowly defined, blinkers between the eyes, down one lane style of perceiving the world. And they've done it very effectively, because people don't try and think about what's right or wrong. They just think it's morally relative and decoupled from physical laws. And the ones who are the most highly predisposed to that is the left brain imbalanced atheists. They confuse me the most, being quote unquote rational people, but they're not really, are they? And it's quite sad, really, because I think everyone, even the NPCs, have some built-in common sense. However, the NPCs seem to get caught up in the affairs of the hive mind, and they take the presence of its illusions and its confusions seriously. Whereas what is most important is your direct experience and your intuition. And in a sense, natural law is built into us. Just do not do harm to others. And you have the right to defend yourself, to take actions yourself which do not do harms to others. It's very efficient. It's very simple. Do not deny your direct experience, your inner knowing. You know deep down inside what's right or wrong, even if society tells you that wrong is a right. It's simple. Deny society its influence, and you can see right through it, crystal clear. Do not get confused by the hive mind. It's there to deter you from the true spiritual path. What is right is that which is true, and by definition it is something that is based on what is objectively true. A wrong is something that is not based on what is objectively true. That is why a right, in terms of right action, in terms of morality, is synonymous with being right factually, objectively. Likewise with wrong. They are both in and of the same. A right, morally, is based on the objective outcome, not moral relativity, not what you subjectively feel should happen in the physical world, because the laws of physics will give you the finger if you think you can override the physical laws. Everybody has an equality of rights. Everyone, it is not possible to grant a person or group of people superfluous rights of the individual. The group is composed of individuals, therefore the smallest minority within that group is the individual. Therefore, the violation of someone's individual rights is a violation of a minority. So, I cannot grant the government the right to tax people, because I do not have the right to do that myself. I can't just go to my neighbour and say, hey there, give me 20% of your labour, otherwise I'm going to kidnap you and lock you in a cage. I can't do that. Who can do that? Can the police do it? Can the bankers do it? Can the politicians do it? Well, they're individuals just like you or I. They are the same humans. They are bound to the same physical laws of this universe. Therefore, I cannot delegate rights that I do not have onto a group of people who are supposed to, present my will in a representative democracy. Democracy is just the rule of the majority over a minority anyway. There's still this power dynamic involved. Everyone has the same rights. Everyone is equal in that regard. Nor is anyone capable of revoking a right from anyone else. You have control over your body. You can put whatever substance you want into it. No one can take that away from you. By taking that away from you, they've essentially claimed ownership over your body. So, is man's law necessary? We could argue that man's law encompasses some aspects of natural law. It's saying do not steal, do not commit murder, do not blackmail, do not rape, do not trespass, do not steal someone else's property. That's all encompassed by man's law. Well, if natural law, which is encoded in the way the universe operates, is included in man's law, then it's immediately irrelevant. It's like including one of the more tangible laws of physics into man-made law. It just doesn't make any sense to put it into writing in the form of legislation when it's very obvious that this is just the way the universe operates. Man needs to not iterate what nature already produces. So it follows logically that it's redundant, it's pre-existent, and it's self-evident, and it's irrelevant and unnecessary. Man's law does encompass some aspects of natural law in some cases. Now, what about the rest of the law that's covered by man's law that doesn't encompass natural law? Well, if a particular man-made law is in opposition to natural law, then it follows logically that it's both false, incorrect, and immoral, harmful. In other words, it's wrong. Therefore, it cannot be legitimately binding upon anyone, because those particular man-made laws which aren't covered by natural law are illegitimate. They step over someone's inherent rights, which is to just perform any action they wish to take, provided it doesn't cause harm to other sentient beings, or it's preventing someone from exercising a right that's inherent to them and stopping them from being able to defend themselves up to and including deadly force against those who would aggress upon their ability to perform that right action. Forces which have an intention to control you and limit you and put you in a cage because you are no longer free, you're subject to slavery. Okay, I'm going to read a few slides from Passio's seminar here because I think it really highlights the main issues of what rights are in regards to the world that we see today. So the first one would be taxation. It says here that taxation is the claim that a group of people who call themselves government have been given the magical right to confiscate an arbitrarily chosen percentage of the products of another individual's labour, a form of property, whether or not the other agrees to share that product voluntarily. Taxation is enforced by the threat of violence, behaviour resulting in bodily harm, or imprisonment, the taking away of physical freedom of movement. If those from whom the product is being seized attempt to resist the confiscation, this practice has always been justified, made into a right, by those who claim that such practice is necessary and required to uphold the common good. If we define slavery as the involuntary confiscation of 100% of the product of labour of another human being, we can clearly see that there is no magical percentage to which we could lower this number, other than 0%. That would no longer constitute slavery. If we are being honest with ourselves, taxation is merely a euphemism for theft, violence, and slavery, the practices of which it is entirely based. Since no individual anywhere on earth has the right to claim ownership of the product of another's labour, such behaviour can never be delegated to a group and called a right. Therefore, all forms of taxation are always morally wrong according to natural law. So yeah, I think that says it all. It's a form of theft of the product of your labour, your property, and it's enforced through violence because they will lock you up and no one has any right to take that which you have rightfully earned, because the only resultant of that, in accordance with natural law, is chaos, is entropy. We can do that if we want chaos or entropy, but life requires that we are bound by the laws of order, the laws required to maintain order. Therefore, it is a wrong to enforce taxation onto people. You can think of taxation as feudalism. We essentially live in a neo-feudalistic society. Before you would have barons of the land and the king who would govern the serfs, who would have to work the land and pay a certain rate to the barons just to continue living on that land. Well, that's pretty much the same thing that we have today. It hasn't changed. Feudalism is just a euphemism for violence and slavery. So, the next slide I want to read is about prohibition. So, prohibition is the claim that a group of people who call themselves government have been given the right to prevent others from putting any given substance into their own bodies, and if those others refuse to comply with those terms, they will be fined or imprisoned. It should be self-evident that if an individual's body is actually their own property, then that individual always maintains the natural right to decide what will or will not be put into their own property, their body. Understanding this, we can easily see that the claim of the right to command what will or will not be put into the body of another person accounts to a claim of ownership upon the other person's body. The claim of ownership upon another person's body is called slavery. Therefore, prohibition is merely a euphemism for slavery backed by violence, regardless of the justifications made by those who claim such practices are necessary for the common good. Since no individual anywhere on earth has the right to claim the ownership of another person's body, such behaviour can never be delegated to a group and called a right. Therefore, all forms of prohibition are always wrong, according to natural law. So I think that says it all. Once again, in the same context of taxation, with regards to locking you up in a cage, they now claim ownership over your body by telling you what you can and cannot put into your body. Now, it's one thing to take a substance and go and cause harm to others, assault someone, for instance, but that ultimately is on you. You took the free will choice to put the substance in your body. Therefore, the effect of that was on your hands. If you take a substance and you're not doing harm to anyone else, but you cause harm to yourself, well, that's on you. It's no one else's responsibility to tell you what you can and cannot do. You could take your own life if you wanted to. I don't suggest you do. That's not good. But you have the free will choice to do that. I can't stop you. I don't have the right to stop you. You own your body. I don't own it. Therefore, people are talking about all this needly stuff, this prick stuff right now, saying that if they mandate it, they're going to claim ownership of your body. They've been doing it for centuries. This is not something that's new. So, moving on to the next slide about licenses and permits. Licenses and permits are claims that a group of people who call themselves government have been given the right to prevent others from exercising specific behaviours, even if such behaviours cause no harm to others or their property, unless those others petition, beg, or pay the government for permission to be allowed to exercise those behaviours. This amounts to the claim that rights are merely privileges that may be granted or taken away by government based upon their preference or discretion. Remembering that the definition of a right is any action which does not cause harm to another living being or their property, there is no such thing as the right to stop someone from exercising a right, since rights cause no harm. The claim over the rights of another person is called slavery. Even more so, it is the claim to be God, the claim that the rights of others flow from you. Therefore, licensing and permits are merely other euphemisms for slavery, regardless of the justifications made by those who claim such practices are necessary for the common good. Since no individual anywhere on earth has the right to claim ownership of another person's rights, such behavior can never be delegated to a group and called a right. Therefore, all forms of licensing and permits are always wrong, according to natural law. So I think that says it all. They're arbitrarily saying what is a right, which they just made it to be something that they claim that they can give to their slaves below, and they're more like privileges. They're more like the loosening of the chains of slavery. They're not inherent to you. They're not built into the universe. This is man's law. This is not God's law. So, it's just ridiculous. But, and you could say that there are arguments that could be made upon why those permits need to be enforced, but as I get to it soon, if it's not causing any harm, then you have a right to do it. If you walk onto someone's private property because you don't have the permit to, I don't know, say like fish in a lake or something of their property, which they lease out, then, that is a wrong because it's that person's property. But generally, that isn't the case. So a justification just means to make a right. And, the government will claim to have jurisdiction over you to make a right out of nothing. That they don't have any right themselves to be the arbiters of what's right and what's wrong. Nature decides that. Nature doesn't care what man thinks about what morality is. We are bound to nature. Nature is the true government, not government. So what are some natural law transgressions? What actions violates the principle? You find that when you break it down, it settles to a few. So the first would be murder or assault. So the taking of someone's life. Rape, the taking of someone's sexual consent. Theft, the taking of someone's property that they had rightfully earned themselves that does not belong to you. Trespass, similar to theft, you are trespassing onto someone's property. Or coercion, so it can be kind of like blackmail or forcing someone through the threat of violence to do something against their will. What is the common trend here? The common trend is that all of these actions result in some kind of theft. Murder or assault is the taking away of someone's right to protect their body. Rape is taking control of someone else's body. Theft is self-explanatory. Trespass is stealing someone's right to the privacy of their own property. And coercion, it could also be lying, is the forceful withdrawal of information that that person needs to know. So it's all a form of theft at the end of the day. So, someone owns something, it means that they have, the rightful possession to it, i.e. they have mixed their labor into it, or they were born with what they own through the process of biology. They control the usage of that particular thing. So the greatest example of that would be property or an item, or if it's your own body. And the last point would be if they take responsibility. And I think that that's pretty self-explanatory. So some form of property is always being stolen when a wrongdoing is committed. So once again, in the apophatic, a sentient being must have had some form of property stolen from them in order to have been harmed, in order to designate a wrong action. Theft is at the core of natural law transgressions. There's no such thing as delegation of a wrong. So, in other words, if something is not a right for the individual, then it cannot be delegated onto another individual or group, and then all of a sudden magically be turned into a legitimate right, because the individual is the first principle that creates the group. And the greatest example of this would be police. It's not called a banker state or politician state, it's called a police state for a reason. They are the ones who immorally have been delegated a right that cannot exist within them as an individual, nor the person delegating the right, the so-called right. So to expand upon natural law, I think it's time to talk about the two pillars or principles of enlightenment. And they are the two principles of enlightenment because when you adhere to them, then you adhere to natural law, and then order can arise out of chaos because you are now aligning your thoughts, emotions, and actions in accordance with how the universe works and not how you think it works within solipsism and moral relativity. So the first of these two pillars is the sacred feminine, or the non-aggression principle, and it simply states that you should not engage in violence. So do not immorally initiate the non-rightful use of physical power to coerce, constrain, or compel rightful physical behaviour or free will choice of another sentient being. So it's just saying, do no harm. Do not be the initiator of violence. Do not be the initiator of a wrong, because the only resultant from that is chaos. If you step over natural law transgressions, i.e. the forms of theft that was discussed earlier, the only resultant from that is chaos and destruction. Now, it might not necessarily be reflected back at you directly in the immediate moment. People get away with theft, people get away with murder. However, what is created as a product of that physically is chaos, disruption, and someone takes the consequence. So if we're talking about the aggregate here, then you are putting chaos into the system, and a lot of people who engage in these transgressions are simply acting from the survival mechanism of the ego, i.e. it's all self-centered and it's solipsistic, and it thinks about itself and its survival outside of the environment, the very life force that allows the individual to exist. So they don't care about the environment, they are putting chaos into the environment.
They don't consciously know that because they're just thinking about themselves, but in doing so, they're actually digging their own grave, because collectively we reap what we sow. I shouldn't say we, I should say them, because we don't do that.
And there was an interesting scenario that came up in a discussion between me and a friend, and he said that he understands natural law to be a science about cause and effect relationships in observable natural phenomena, but he's not completely sold on the idea. He takes it more on faith that, for example, the person who stole his only car has or will suffer the implications. Now, in response to that, there's less effect onto individuals the larger the group, as the effect of the harm created gets dispersed into that group. But there would be caveats if, say, the robber got caught. The smaller the group, the more of a direct effect a single person's actions has on themselves. You could say that the repercussions on an individual due to their actions is inversely proportional to the size of the group, which in the case of our huge one is negligible, because it's a global culture. The only reason why we experience such aggressive slavery from governments today is because most of the individuals in our huge cultural group are immoral and allow the conditions for control and slavery to exist because they've been propagandized and brainwashed. So the aggregate effect is that condition. Unfortunately, some people don't get the karma they deserve, but the group and the environment will always reap the karma of the actions perpetrated by, in essence, itself, because we are all part of nature, at least these bodies are, it's all part of this atomic world. We are atoms, we're made of stardust. The only given is that chaos is created by each immoral action, and someone has to suffer the consequences, which in some cases, unfortunately, isn't the perpetrator.
So, the second pillar of enlightenment is the sacred masculine principle, or the self-defense principle. And it's simply that we have the inherent right to use force, and I emphasize force, not violence, but force. We have the right to use force to defend ourselves from violence conducted upon us by another. And it's quite self-explanatory. If someone pulls a gun at you in the street, they are trying to coerce you through violence, and they could transgress further and take your life. It's all a form of theft. Now, is it right or wrong for us to defend ourselves? Of course it is, because you are correcting a wrong. No two wrongs were done if you shot in defense, because it's reactionary. It's also wrong to just sit back and allow wrongs which have been initiated through violence to take place. There needs to be an equilibrium factor put into the equation. So those are the two pillars, and they're quite simple and neat. But have you noticed that the word force and violence is used, and there's a differentiation between the two terms, that being that force is just the cause of physical change, and violence is the immoral, i.e. you do not have the right to take action to compel, restrain, or in other words, steal off of another sentient being. A force is in harmony with natural law and doesn't violate other people's rights. So the force just causes physical change, i.e. it's an action, and it's a force if it's moral, whereas violence is a coercive action because it causes theft in some way, shape or form, and it's in violation of other people's inherent rights, i.e. you are causing harm to another sentient being. So you always possess the capacity to use force because you have an inherent right to take that action because you don't cause harm to another being. And this includes defense against violence, because you're trying to balance out the equation. You're trying to correct a wrong. It's the appropriate reaction. I've seen cases where people have been prosecuted for killing a thief that trespasses into their home. And there's the first wrong of trespass into someone's home, but then there's the other wrong through manslaughter, dictating that one can't kill in self-defense. Okay, so I want to talk about how natural law expresses itself, and it relates to the trivium process that I spoke about earlier quite significantly. I'll use the table here from Passio's seminar to cover what I want to explain, but basically we have positive and negative natural law expressions, and we say positive and negative in relation to what is required to attain order out of chaos. In actuality, outside of the drive for life, they're neutral. Natural law plays out perfectly. Right now, the chaos that we see that's ensued in the world is perfect clockwork mechanism. It's just that people say that they want to live and to survive and to live relatively pain-free. They also don't have a right to push their worldview of chaos onto people like us. I don't speak for everybody, but I think most people have come to this community wanting to find order out of the chaos. So positive and negative in this regards is how we can achieve order. So if we look at the first step, because these expressions, positive and negative, must be arrived at through a sequential process which first begins within the mind. Because of mentalism, what we see expressed externally had to have first been thought up. So let's talk about the generative polarity. So what we use to create, what are we generating within ourselves such that we can think, such that we can feel, and then enact into the world. The positive expression would be love, consciousness, pattern recognition. The negative would be unconsciousness, just autonomous, hylic or organic portal reaction to stimuli and unconscious programming. i.e. they don't recognize the patterns within their programming, and there's no operator to sift through the information and reorganize new ways of thinking. So the difference between love and fear is there. Next is the initiating expression, or how it starts. How can we start to maintain order? Through knowledge. We first need to understand the problem that we're dealing with. We need to accept the truth, which is what currently exists and what has existed in the past. In order to solve a problem, we must diagnose it. And diagnosis means through knowledge. From the Greek preposition dia, which means through or by way of, and the Greek noun gnosis, meaning knowledge, or by way of knowledge, or through knowledge. So we must first understand what it is that we're dealing with. And just with the trivium process, grammar, logic and rhetoric, or input, process and output, this is the input stage. We need good quality information so we can make the correct decision making, and then output order. And as you might have already guessed, the opposite would be ignorance, the refusal of truth. Different from nescience, as explained beforehand. The information is there, but through your fear, through your unconsciousness, your incapacity to recognize patterns and take in information, you now refuse the truth, because You've been manipulated. They've used your fear against you. You've created a crystallized ego, a rigid skepticism. The next stage is the internal expression. So we've generated either love or fear, we've taken in knowledge, or we've rejected it. What happens when we do that? What happens after the input stage, or the grammar stage of the trivium? Well, the positive expression is sovereignty. So sovereign comes from the Latin adverb super, which means above, and the Latin noun regnum, rulership, control. So sovereign just means one who is above rulership or control of another, not a subject or slave. A sovereign is a monarch, i.e. one ruler. So therefore, we have sovereignty within us, we have an internal monarchy. Therefore our soul rules over our thoughts, emotions, and therefore the logic stage of the trivium now can be operating properly, because we have right knowledge, which came through love and consciousness. We have done the internal work, or the shadow work in Jungian terms, to sift through our opposites, that which we've negated and put to the back of our subconscious. We've worked our way through trauma and our need for an external savior in the form of a religious figure or a government. We stand as a unique individual with creative capacity that goes outside of culture. Now, the negative expression of what goes on internally by those driven by fear and ignorance would be confusion, internal anarchy. There's discontinuity between the thoughts and emotions. You can't make the correct decisions. The logic or the trivium is just out of whack. There's disharmony, there's cognitive dissonance, there's chaos within. Therefore, what you think does not match with how you feel. Therefore, how you act will be completely irrational, because you don't own yourself. Parts of your mind, your psyche, has had this hive mind infection take over certain aspects of that real estate within your mind, and it controls it autonomously. They're like bad programs or viruses, making you act in a way that you would not identify with, yet your actions don't correspond. There's internal anarchy. Anarchy just means no ruler. There's no monarchy, there's not one ruler. So, as with mentalism, what happens externally had to first originate within the mind. So what is the external expression which succeeds the internal expression? In the positive sense, that would be freedom, external anarchy, i.e., anarchy just means no rulers. An, which means for no, and archy for archon, rulers, no rulers. Everybody respects their natural law rights, and there's free will within the constraints of natural law, because everyone understands that everyone else has equal rights and that no one may delegate superfluous rights from the individual onto others, and therefore nobody controls anyone. The negative expression would be control, external monarchy, to contrast internal anarchy, because people don't understand that no one has the right to rule over anyone else. But that happens because man thinks that they can become God and rule over the universe, essentially. But that does not correspond with how natural law actually works and what the truth actually is. It doesn't care about man's intents, what man wants, couldn't give a shit. So what do we manifest? What's the result that we create out of either the positive or negative expression? Well, if you come from a place of love, consciousness, to take in the knowledge of your environment, accept what is and what has occurred in the past, to attain an internal monarchy, there's no discontinuity between your thoughts, emotions, and actions. Therefore, you can make the correct decisions. Therefore, we have external anarchy, and then order pursues, and it goes by that stepwise process from the mind to the external. The negative expression is chaos, manifested evil. And it all starts from fear. You want to refuse the truth through your ignorance. Confusion incurs. There's no controller of your mind. It's just been bamboozled. but someone does it externally because the person who is the external monarch has internal anarchy within their mind, and then we have chaos, which is antithetical to life. But someone who is confused with internal anarchy would say that they want to live, yet their actions don't correspond with that. So the manifestation can be seen as the output stage, or the rhetoric stage of the trivium process. So you can see that the trivium is a very important key in understanding how natural law manifests from your mind to the external world, the external expression. The comedian Bill Hicks, God bless his soul, said this: "The world is like a ride in an amusement park. And when you choose to go on it, you think it's real because that's how powerful our minds are. And the ride goes up and down, round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly coloured, and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while. Some people have been on the ride for a long time, and they begin to question, is this real, or is this just a ride? And other people have remembered, and they come back to us. They say, hey, don't worry, don't be afraid, ever, because this is just a ride, and we choose to kill those people. Ha, shut him up, we have a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry. Look at my big bank account and my family. This has to be real. It's just a ride. But we always kill those good guys who try and tell us that. You ever notice that? And let the demons run amok. But it doesn't matter, because it's just a ride, and we can change it any time we want. It's only a choice. No effort, no work, no job, no savings and money. A choice, right now, between fear and love." Okay, so I'm going to talk about the law of freedom. So, how does complying with natural law affect the aggregate? And it's already been discussed here, but to formally put it down, you could say that freedom and morality are directly proportional. So, as a society becomes more moral, i.e., every individual with their individual rights knows what a right is and does not impose themselves over other people's rights, then morality increases. As a response to that, freedom will increase, because any form of slavery, i.e., through taxation, through legislation, through prohibition, through transgressions, is a theft of some kind, which imposes upon freedom. Likewise, as morality declines, freedom declines. So, truth and morality is inversely proportional to the presence of tyranny and slavery in our society. Let's talk about chaos as a teacher, and as mentioned before, in terms of what a right is, a wrong results in chaos, and it passes its lessons through the apophatic. Authority suppresses possibility through the fear of chaos, and true freedom implies a willingness to accept infinite possibilities, including chaos. The fear of the possibility of chaos is the cause of chaos and true freedom, and thus that results in the death of the imagination. The death of the imagination removes one's ability to imagine a possibility outside of the current circumstances, which is fear of chaos and slavery. So, once the imagination has been killed through the fear of chaos, then any chance for change is impossible. So this is when people become rigidly skeptical and their egos become crystallized. Those who believe in authority believe that slavery is necessary and must continue to prevent chaos, but, looking at first principles, you cannot prevent chaos with chaos. Therefore, people are scared of the possibility of chaos and want chaos to curate chaos. Yes, first principles. They're scared of the possibility of chaos when they're already in chaos, because authority is violence and chaos, because it transgresses other people's natural law rights. There's no need to fear chaos, we're already in it. So I'd rather take the possibility of chaos than chaos to curate chaos. There's caveats to that, where people might say, we need the chaos of taxation for the sake of charity and benefit to those who need it in society. Now, there is a place for charity, but that is all dependent upon individuals.
giving their consent to give up a portion of their labour in the aid of others. You don't do it through force, through stealing other people's labour in order to make that into a right. That's not how it works. You can never achieve a rightful charitable action in a million years through the theft of other people's labour in that way. That will never work. And if you look at the state of society today, with this rampant Stockholm syndrome and slavery, people can't even be charitable to themselves. They can't have the self-respect to demand their own sovereignty. So if they can't be respectful to themselves and charitable to themselves, how do you expect, through their own self-volition, through an understanding of morality, how do you expect to get genuine charity?
Under that simple example of benefits and charity, you can see how the violation of the first principle, which is to first not do harm through stealing other people's labour, can be abstracted as you move down a chain of, say, a multitude of rights being violated to achieve a supposed right. So, for instance, in the case of Western forces going to foreign countries to supposedly bring democracy, which people have been brainwashed to believe that is right, when it's really just the rule of the majority over a minority, up to and including the individual. Well, think about the amount of wrongs that are done in order to achieve that so-called quote-unquote right. And it becomes abstract because the NPC or Hylic population only sees what's presented in front of their face. Therefore, chaos is created and they can't even see its origins because they're in a fear of chaos. So they want the chaos to prevent chaos, and it makes no sense, does it? What is government? Government is derived from the Latin verb gubernare, meaning to control, and the Latin noun mentis, meaning mind. So in other words, government means to control the mind. Government, and hence authority, is an illusion of a diseased psyche whose origin resides within psychopathy, the deletion of empathy. Psychopathy, psychology, pathology, a diseased mind. Authority is part of a diseased psyche based upon left or right brain imbalance, or master or slave mentalities. The master aspect being the left brain imbalance, or the right brain mentality being a slave mentality. The master being the left brain imbalance, saying that you have the right to create law and that mankind can dominate over nature because there's no inherent meaning. Therefore, through Darwinian evolution, we have the right to reign supreme and make law within our collective solipsism. And within the right brain mentality, everything's predetermined. The law is the law. Man's law is the religion's law. It's on your knees. There's no possibility of change. Authority and those who believe in it have a diseased psyche. It's built upon an erroneous and dogmatic belief that some people are masters and have the moral right to issue commands, and there are others who are slaves with the moral obligation to obey the masters. Authority makes the law through jurisdiction, whose Latin etymology comes from the noun jus or juris, which means law, and the Latin verb dictare, meaning to speak or to say what the law is. Authority is the idea that man can become God through jurisdiction and dictate law. So why do people believe in authority? Well, it comes down to self-loathing. To believe that it's morally legitimate for slavery to be applied to oneself is a loss of self-respect. They will often bring others down to their level because if they suffer, you must suffer. They cannot resolve the inadequacy within themselves through the shadow work. Therefore they must project their shadow onto others, and everyone must be like themselves, because if you're outside of the authoritative control structure, you represent that which they have rejected, that which they loathe within themselves. So, respect, self-respect. Looking at the etymology of respect, the Latin prefix re means again, and the verb spectare, to look at oneself again. People who have a fear of chaos have parental abandonment issues, unresolved childhood trauma, whereby they have lost or never had the support of the parents. We see that in modern times through TV programming and the school, where the authority figures become the parental figures now, and you have the left for the archetypal mother or the right for the archetypal father. So the fear of chaos leading to parental abandonment issues, which then leads to that self-loathing, that lack of self-respect, the lack of the ability to take a look at oneself. And if you can't do that, you can't do the shadow work. Therefore you lack a sense of personal responsibility, which is that slave mentality, or the belief that you can control others and people have to obey your jurisdiction. What you say is the law, even if it doesn't abide by how natural law works, which is binding and immutable. I've spoke about neo-feudalism before, and this is all about slavery. In the medieval period, the church would rule over the world. But what's the difference between the authority of the false god of the Abrahamic religions and the Pope, and the institution of the church with government? Instead of being a monotheistic religion, it's a group of people called government, but they're the same religious figure. They are the excuse to take responsibility off of your shoulders and lock your mind into a cage. The lack of responsibility to curate your own mind, to create that internal monarchy, so that external anarchy and the respect of other people's natural law rights can take place. That lack of responsibility, the lack of self-respect, the inability to resolve your parental abandonment issues. Government is violence and slavery. It's a euphemism for those terms. It's entirely based upon man's law, which is illegitimate, as was discussed earlier. So when we look at religion, which is derived from religare, meaning to bind, to thwart, to hold back from further progress, the inability to take responsibility for yourself, to have someone create your mind for you. We can see that essentially a belief in government is a religion. They're the same mechanisms, and we haven't changed the working model of control from church to modern governments as we see now, neo-feudalism. We can define this belief in authority and government as statism. Most divisions, race, gender, class, they are divide and conquer tactics that's designed to turn people against each other. Yet I've seen a flood of migrants in my country, in the UK, and the cultures, they don't combine. Yet the commonality that I've seen between people here is that there's this dark binding, a shared culture that's forced onto them, yet they're allowed to keep their ideological differences. So why would you force the shared culture and its so-called benefits for the greater good of the people, yet show this apathy towards resolving the differences and in fact actually fueling those differences and those conflicts that has been allowed to flourish in the emergence of globalization and people who shouldn't really be living together, yet being bound by this slavery system. There's a refusal on their part due to the inherent polarities and the divide and conquer mind control techniques that have been applied to them by the society at large, this mind virus. And there's a huge effort that's been put into it, or should I say lack of the wants to address those issues by society, yet they will force everyone to pay taxes with extreme effort. How does that make sense? So yeah, you can say that statism is the brilliant idea that we give a small group of people the right to kidnap, steal from,
and kill us, i.e. transgressing upon our natural law rights in the form of widespread theft, so that we can be protected from the people who kidnap, steal and kill from us, so that we can be protected from the possibility of chaos, through our inability to resolve our inadequacy, to unify our thoughts, emotions and actions to align with how the universe actually works and not with how we want it to work. Now, we've spoken about the inherent divide and conquer tactics devised to distract people from the true divide that exists, and that's those who believe in statism and those who believe in the rule of God's law, how the universe actually works. If we could give a name to the people who aren't involved in statism, the other half of the true divide, how could we put it? Well, we don't believe in authority, we don't believe in government, we believe in a lack of rulership. We respect everyone's inherent rights, which are equal, and we understand that no man has the capacity to rule over another man because those rights are not superfluous from the individual. So if we look at the word archon means master or ruler. So how about we use the word anarchy, the etymology being the Greek prefix an, which means without, the absence of, the Greek noun archon, master, ruler. So it just means the absence of masters or rulers, no masters and no slaves. Notice how there's a huge emphasis within society to make anarchy seem as if it's chaos, to mean that there's no rules. Society at large portrays anarchists as perpetually stepping over natural law to create chaos, yet they don't understand that that portrayal of anarchy is a microcosmic representation of authority and government at large. But that just says it for itself, because we live in an inverted reality. Government and authority is violence and slavery. Government and authority is chaos, and it can't protect you from the possibility of chaos because you're already in it, and that's what they need to understand. Anarchy does not mean without rules, it literally means without rulers, without masters. And we'll never see peace until people govern themselves, but that requires sovereignty to have monarchy within. But does that require an observer to apply consciousness to see the patterns within the biological avatar? Is it possible amongst the NPC population? Who knows? If the NPCs are real, then, well, it doesn't matter whether soullessness is a real thing or not. The actions given by the majority or the aggregate of humanity shows what's going on within their minds, because the mind is the cause and the effect is this control structure we've got going on now. You see, the NPCs need government as a religion to create their reality. And with regards to the NPCs, despite the fact that government and authority in itself is entirely an illegitimate institution, it seems to me that the centrist approach seems to be the most viable for NPC populations, because their needs are met. And extreme polarities within the political spectrum, the extreme left or the extreme right, communism or fascism, will result in totalitarianism in some way, shape or form. And the NPCs only put up a fight until their needs aren't met. We could see that in the Soviet Union in the 90s when it had economic problems and collapsed. The NPCs weren't having their basic needs met, such as housing or clothing or food. And so they overthrew their rulers, but they withstood extreme poverty until the straw breaks the camel's back, which is their basic needs not being met. They don't think about how they could improve their situation or to catalyze that change out of self-determined ideological reasoning that is not an ideology that was fed to them by an external with an agenda to control them. And they've allowed those conditions to reach such extreme extents to the point where conscious and non-conscious individuals don't even have the time to think about their situation of control, because there's a constant need to survive and there's no chance for free thinking. They only think about what's presented in front of them. A good example of how it can reach an extreme would be North Korea today or China. They live under extreme subjugation of personal rights and complete and utter mind virus
transgression of natural law, yet they still get their basic needs met. I mean, not really in North Korea, but it's not to the extent where revolt needs to happen. But, this is the insanity, the mass psychosis of the NPC population. They literally can't think independently to create that internal monarchy, to get that external expression of anarchy and order. They seem to be bound to this hive mind. More individual consciousness is needed to assert independence from the hive, to create the conditions for anarchy to be a real possibility. Aligning yourself to natural law is a process that must be embarked upon alone as a deep introspection into the shadow. As I said before, people want the government to prevent chaos, even though they're already in a state of chaos through the mere presence of the government existing. But as I said it before, they are right. If government didn't exist with the current population who doesn't understand natural law, chaos probably would ensue. You'd probably get the same structure of government popping up again, because people don't seem to be able to create an alternative system. They always revolve back to what they know. So to some extent the skeptics are right, but then what's the alternative option? Continue on with this chaos in the form of government? Is history bound to repeat itself? Can we break free of these circumstances that has crippled the species for so long? I don't know. The argument that they make is also based on the fact that this is the only way to move forward, but they can't seem to reconcile the nature of humans that we're dealing with here. We're dealing with absolute animals. Of course, if you removed government, complete chaos would ensue, and it would be the anarchy that they have in their minds, not what anarchy actually is. So we're in a bit of a sticky situation here, but we can't deny the truth, because that will just lead us into the very circumstances which has got us here. Our inability to see the objective laws of reality and natural law. So who keeps this system of slavery, authority and government in place? Who actually enforces it? Who are the people on the ground doing that? That is the police and the military. Who is more morally culpable? Culpable just means deserving of blame, from the Latin noun culpa, which means fault or blame. Is it the people who give the orders, the politicians, or the scientists, or the people in the institutions? If a politician tells the military to go and blow up another country for the sake of democracy, are they to blame? Most people will point their fingers at the leader, but the leader is just a minute aspect of the whole situation. People will blame Hitler for what he did, or Stalin for what ensued in his regime, but did they actually do it? They weren't the ones on the ground who actually waged wars. It was the people, the police and the military, who actually instigated the action which transgressed on other people's natural law rights. And I'm not saying that the story of how the 20th century wars and regimes are presented are entirely correct. I think in regards to the Second World War, it's everyone involved. The people in the countries instigating violence and stepping over the natural law rights of the citizens of another person's countries, the people in those regimes who would follow the orders in order to create the initiating attack, not understanding morality for themselves, and then the people in the opposite country following orders to retaliate. There wouldn't be a complete conquest if there was a refusal to fight. I just don't think that people would follow orders in that respect from the attacking country. It's all entirely composed by leaders giving order followers orders to attack and creating invisible enemies, and then
pitting those people off against each other. You know, people in other countries who, for the average person, is just completely disconnected from, you ask your neighbours in your local area what their opinion of, other people's businesses in other countries, and, what they can tell you so far disconnected from the truth is unbelievable. They do have an opinion, of course, as they always do, but it's what the TV had given them, so we can't consider that. Where's the true opinion? There is no true opinion other than what they've been propagandized. So in the same way that they can accept opinions like that, they can so easily accept the edict to go to war. And where's the conscience? There is no conscience. It's just automatic, even up to instigating their own death. So the true heroes of the war, in my opinion, were the pacifists, who would get locked up in prison and called traitors or cowards and get beaten up. They were the true heroes because they didn't want any part in that fuckery.
So really, the order followers are more morally culpable because these are the guys who are actually enforcing the authority and the totalitarianism. Both the order givers and the order followers are culpable, but it is the people on the ground enforcing the situation who are more to blame. Like I said before, it's not a politician state, it's a police state, because the police are the ones who put it in place. So order followers cannot be moral or exercise conscience. Conscience comes from the Latin prefix con, which means together, and the Latin verb siere, which means to know or to understand, to know together, to know law, natural law, together, to have your thoughts, emotions correspond with your actions, to know together, to know the true objective difference between right and wrong. They can't exercise morals or conscience because the very act of following an order is not deciding for yourself right or wrong action. An order follower is completely antithetical to someone with morality. You can have an order follower who follows a very peaceful leader who has their best intentions in mind, but if you're deciding to forsake your conscience to follow another person, even if the action is good, that's still wrong, because that very mechanism and mindset can so easily be turned the other way, and it's the very root cause foundations which leads to these unconscious conditions of order followers delegating responsibility from themselves to the ones issuing the orders. Order followers are always culpable for their actions, as it was they who decided through their free will choice to forsake their conscience in the first place. And they are the ones who commit the crime. Politicians don't do it in person. I was just doing my job. It's never an excuse by a justification that allows this to occur. Most people believe this is legitimate because a group of people called government, that's inherently illegitimate, claim to have jurisdiction, the right to make law, over what's right or wrong. Order following should never be seen as a virtue by any moral human being. They are responsible for every form of oppression and slavery that's ever existed on the face of the earth. To exercise conscience involves a free will choice of right action over wrong action once the definitive knowledge of the objective difference between right or wrong, according to the natural laws of the universe, have been acquired. People who follow orders have made the free will choice to forsake their conscience. So the bullshit excuse of I was just following orders is never legitimate. They must be held accountable for the crimes that they commit through their actions. People will make the excuses that we need the police to curate the general public because quote-unquote anarchy will ensue. But like I mentioned before, there's a lack of the shadow work to admit the nature of human beings in that situation. First principles. You do not make a right by committing a wrong. Order followers forsake conscience. Therefore, without order followers, yes, the people who make the arguments against natural law are right in the sense of their quote-unquote anarchy of no rules and non-abiding to natural law will ensue, because we're dealing with a horde of barbarians essentially. But do they have the capability to admit that to themselves? No.
To look within themselves and understand the situation that they're in that they have no right to delegate a so-called right onto another human being to control others that they do not have themselves, and then take responsibility into their own hands and enforce natural law principles through their own self-determined will and knowledge of how the universe works.
And so because they refuse to look at the nature of human beings, they would rather go with committing a wrong to make a right, or to delegate rights onto the police or the military, where they don't have the right to prohibit, restrict through license, or to lock someone in a cage for not paying taxes. The ultimate issue is a lack of consciousness here. Natural law cannot be ascribed with words completely, as part of its origin resides within
spiritual law,
but its origin comes from a source that few people seem to have. Without teaching it is obvious to those with a spark. And when I talk about the obviousness, I'm just talking about it's obvious to those who have the capacity for sovereignty within themselves. Natural law resides upon people owning themselves and respecting and knowing their own rights, and not externalizing their need to understand reality to some external religious figure like your classical religions or governments/authority. Whether the NPC theory is real or not, it's quite obvious that most of the human population, one, do not seek the knowledge themselves so that they can not be ignorant, so that they can apply the correct decision-making process to manifest a reality that's based on order for the conditions of life to perpetuate themselves and correspond with natural law. It doesn't really matter at this point whether humans have souls or not. Most people act in a soulless fashion. To those who are highly intuitive but still locked into the mind virus matrix, they use their capacity for individual thoughts and their intuition to reach into those creative domains in order to enhance their standing within the hive mind matrix. Good examples of this would be scientists or engineers who have a fairly decent balance of left and right brain, masculine and feminine aspects of their consciousness, yet they'll use their intuition to gain creativity in relation to purely the left brain and to reside themselves within gaining a greater standing in the society. They don't use their intuition to try to understand the root causes of the issues that they see in the world. They just see that as some chaotic byproducts that they can't possibly understand, that only the leaders of the world are capable of undergoing. So we have to face the reality at hand. To me, it seems like natural law is idealistic for most of humanity to encompass, mainly because of the lack of consciousness or drive for people to understand not only the external world around them, but what's going on within their minds. The amount of people I meet who have absolutely no interest in psychology, or the self-improvement that they do have concern with is in regards to improving their social standing or to further their position within the system. So, what's the alternative to natural law? Do we just degrade ourselves into the hive and allow chaos to prevent chaos? We're already in a state of chaos, and it can only get worse because this is a feedback loop. We see rampant leftism, yet we see examples of communism in the real world today, in the form of, China would be an extreme example, and the ultimate conclusion being what we see in places like North Korea. Yet there's people who are in the Zoomer generation who want communism to take place. It's unbelievable. There's no wanting to acquire knowledge of the full spectrum of the conditions which bring about the operation of a society. See, if natural laws are idealistic, communism's completely idealistic. Is it an unreasonable quest to ask for no slavery? Is that idealistic? You see, there seems to be some broken aspects of our species that perpetuates itself like a virus, and some avatar's composition of personality spares mental real estate for the neurological foundation via neurogenesis and neuroplasticity of a feedback loop into oneself or consciousness, which was never curated to begin with, i.e. there was not an observer curating how the mental real estate was allocated, yet the external force, i.e. the hive, realized the programmability of that particular avatar and exploited that. See, it's a contention between your soul in the higher realms to program your ego, or the hive
to manage the grammar or input stage of the trivium process of learning.
That's why the term organic portal was used, because organic life here seems to be sensory portals for higher dimensional or less dense frequencies to interact with this place. It's an aspect of individuality versus some hive entity that's trying to program the mind. And you see, like, once the feedback loop has reinforced itself, whether it be through soul or the hive, it becomes self-perpetuating. There's neuronal pruning from childhood to your late 20s, whereby most of the neurons become pruned and you become efficient to perceive the world in one way. And if you've fucked yourself by allowing hive influences to control you, then it's quite hard, if not impossible, to get out. The only way to get out is through trauma or through some kind of cathartic spiritual experience. Yet for those who were conscious from the beginning, you can't unsee what you see. You can't deny reality either. The reason why most people don't understand natural laws because they can't see how we could exist without government, because they don't look into themselves. They don't see how a world without the rule of government
would not turn into
a tribe of barbarians who have no understanding of morality at all. This is the reality we face. So to some extent, as humans are in their current condition now, government is necessary. But do we want government? I don't want government. I don't want slavery. And yet these people seem to need to herd themselves, but they want to get you involved as well. If you want to live outside of the system, you've got no choice. Empathy is something that the psychopaths will never understand. No, their only modus operandi in this world is Satanism. It's just self-preservation at all costs at the expense of everyone else. No, I think we're at the next stage of evolution for humanity, where this descent from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic to specializations of professions to left brain modes of thinking to a further scientific dissection of the world around us to control the material world lacks the wisdom or the intuitive, spiritual, empathetic aspect of the human mind. Most of humanity wants to continue going down the path of maximum pain because they don't want to give up the thoughts that they're addicted to. Even though the natural world itself, nature in its rawest forms, outside of human influence, is still confined to duality. Nature still is bound to death, decay, and entropy because we live in a dualistic place and nature's trying to perfect itself. But because this place is inherently imperfect, the duality creates suffering, as the novelty of life and creation has to contend with the death and entropy that's built in. So I can see that, but it's a much better deal to be aligned with that than the human world of moral relativism and the hive mind, because the human world is but a denser form of this world of duality. So I'd rather shred density and reside in a higher order of reality that's possible for our human forms within this place until we die. Then we're free to explore the multiverse if we want to. Ego is such a gamble for nature. Yet, despite its crystallization without influence, the ego is necessary for the divine to be here. So there's theories that, despite the inversion of this place, if the divine is here and incarnate in people with consciousness to do something to subvert the inversion, then the ego is necessary for that. Yet, I think the mind virus wants to perpetuate as much of the human avatar as much as possible, because it needs the creative force of the divine, because it can't create itself. Yet its only way of attaining that which it lacks, because it's inverted and essentially rejected by creation, is to react, but within the nature of its inversion. So it can't react in accordance with the natural laws of the universe. It has to react in ways which cause chaos, which polarizes it to the death and the entropic aspects of the duality of this place. So I think it's digging its own grave. But, that's just a theory, given the assumption that this place is a fallen world. Other people think it's a testing ground, but I'm just throwing that out there. The resistance we see today is just absolutely pathetic. Mankind needs to deal with its inner demons. Most people today have negative knowledge. It's not only ignorance of truth and objective reality, but it's a further descent into illusions. So getting rid of negative knowledge is weeding through, doing the shadow work, to work on yourself, to see objective reality, to take in the information about how the world actually works around you, to put the time and the effort, reading books, watching documentaries, listening to podcasts, to deprogram yourself, to get back to a 0 point, not even a point of getting closer to gnosis, but just to get back to how you were when you were a kid. The reality's inversion immediately puts people from childhood into this negative knowledge. For most people, doing less than what they're currently doing, i.e. non-compliance with government and authoritarian mandates, is much better than what they're currently doing now, which is reacting in a state of fear because of this situation that's going on, because they think that this chaotic situation of this global virus, this illusionary virus, not the mind virus, I'm talking about the big bad bug that they're presenting, reacting to that just fuels the egregore, or the thought form, or the collective idea of government. The resistance is fueling this idea of government. You're reacting to your captor. These psychopaths, they love the attention that they're given. Non-compliance is the way, yet to be non-compliant implies a parallel society, yet for that to work, it requires sovereignty within one's mind, it requires consciousness, it requires the capacity to think for yourself. I don't see that happening just yet, and whether it will happen at all, we'll just have to see. Throughout history, it hasn't happened. At least the fall into civilization out of the Paleolithic. Yet we live in different times today. We have the internet. We would otherwise not be able to communicate like this. So I do think that the playing field has changed. Yet to contrast that, the internet is also the greatest form of control and beacon of mass indoctrination through propaganda that they can use against us. So it's a double-edged sword. Yet the conditions are different now. So I haven't completely given up on the species. I want to see what happens. Humans need to get out of this emotional mind control. The appearances and the way something presented is not the truth. 2 plus 2 does not equal 5. Doesn't matter how the person presents something to you. What matters is the information. And if they can't explain what they mean, then are they to be trusted? Apparently so, according to most humans, who seem to not question anything, because what they are presented with, they take on as truth, because they think that what they're being presented with through the TV or the idiot box is the census of the community, because of the religious mindset, because of the need to have one to give your minds to you, because you lack the impetus to acquire the information for the grammar stage of the trivium. You can't make the right decisions then. You can't put the right action in place. So, to summarize, we have gone over topics such as what consciousness and truth is, objective versus subjective morals, the worldview schism of the left and right brain, the trivium process of learning, grammar, logic, rhetoric,
and how it manifests physical reality, what rights are and their various delegations, the non-aggression and self-defense principles, transgressions of rights in how all of them are some form of theft, what is authority in government, the mentality of order followers, and the difference between anarchy and statism. I will add an addendum to this video with a book overview of the Kabbalion covering the 7 Hermetic principles, where we will delve deeper into natural law principles, so look out for that. Unfortunately, the length of this video is getting too long, so I've had to cut it short. So, in closing, the main point to take away from this is that the knowledge of natural law encompasses an evolutionary process within you as an individual. There is no institutional hive mind or egregore-based solution, as these entities are composed of individuals, and the agency for change appears to manifest exclusively within sovereign individuals. Hive minds, for some reason, have a tendency towards providing the natural law conditions for chaos and entropy. New ideas always arise within introverted conditions to draw out of oneself. Hives can only replicate that which exists. So this is also not to say that sovereign beings shouldn't form groups, but the catch is that these groups are formed out of morals, values, and principles, and not a religious mindset of giving away power to that group. You are the solution. The shadow work to address that which you have hidden or rejected from yourself brings you closer to the truth of who you really are. You must sift through the peer pressure because, despite it being a valid survival aspect in the past, the controllers are in full knowledge of human psychology and have created an ecosystem which hacks this exposed aspect of our minds, driving behaviour in the direction they want. It starts within. Knowledge of natural law empowers you fully. You must become self-reliant, self-determined, develop the will to stand up for what's right in these times. Fuck the hive. Don't care about what others think of you. Morality is objective, and you can know that you are a good person despite what the moral relativists might want to throw at you, as shadow projections of themselves that you, through your very existence, appears to twinge within the recesses of their subconscious. A reminder of that which they gave up many years ago, the internal sense of right and wrong that we're all born with, burning with the intensity of a bonfire. Some continue to stoke the fire, whereas others rekindled it later on in life, but for them, it has been beaten out until only smoke of the extinguished flame remains. Your past is your memories, your future is yet to be written. The power you have to exercise free will within the confines of natural law is right now, in this moment. So do you choose to be a slave or a free man? I know what I'm choosing. And from the bottom of my heart, I have the utmost faith in you. This is the ultimate battle to preserve your soul, to force the hand of fate and embed your own destiny in this place, aside from whatever they had planned for you. Once you have this knowledge, you cannot be controlled nor manipulated by the persistent narcissistic forces which pervade this reality, whose weapon is morally relativistic gaslighting. Don't get too boiled down with the musings of the clown show. The problem has been thoroughly discussed. Time and attention are the spiritual currencies here, and opposing truth and narratives are set up by the matrix to funnel those currencies into their goal of making you ineffective. The power of your hands to mold and craft the world is paramount. Everyone has something unique within them. Show the world your creativity. Bring something new to the table. Spread this knowledge. Empower others. This is what it means to truly be alive. This is what it means to redeem the human spirit. This is the great work.